And we're going to be doing some things to help us understand what he's talking about. And because we're talking about a parable using symbolism, and if we don't understand the symbolism or the ideas behind it, then we're going to miss some of the meaning. And really, no matter what we do, we'll probably miss meaning simply because we're not in the same culture as Nephi and Jacob were. We don't have the same background as they did. We don't understand the geography or the things that they understood, and so there'll be things that we miss. But I believe that there's a lot of worth to this discussion, and so I hope that we can bring that out. So as we read Parable of the Olive Tree through Jacob chapter 3, we're really making sure that we focus on the purpose of this talking, which is Jacob is going to ask a question and answer a question, and it's about the house of Israel as he sees into the future, and he's thinking about this idea that the Jews will reject Jesus Christ, and then he's going to try to answer the question, after having rejected Jesus Christ, how is it the house of Israel can ever build upon him and make him the head of their corner? By head of the corner, I think about the cornerstone, the most important piece upon which everything else is built. How is it that can ever happen? And we sort of set that up last time, but we're going to try to march forward with that today. We'll wait just a minute for a prayer as they come in. So I'll give you a preview here of where we're going. We're going to watch. We need to talk a little bit, or we need to have in our mind some questions to help us understand this parable. We can talk about them now, but we could talk about them better at the end. So we'll just sort of throw these out there. If this is about a tree, when Jacob is talking about the tree, he talks about the roots, the branches, and the fruit. And he doesn't really explicitly say what they are. And so, but I think we can infer, because of the simplicity of the message, what does the root of the tree symbolize? What do the branches of the tree symbolize? And what does the fruit symbolize? To get us started in that thinking, we're going to read together, as this Australian guy reads, a little piece from Romans. We'll talk a little bit about, no, not yet. We'll talk a little bit about what we think he's talking about with these, and then we'll get started with the parable. And we're going to try to break this parable into a bunch of parts, because it's 153 verses long, and we won't get through all of them today. And if we did, we wouldn't get anything meaningful done. So Jacob's going to ask a question. We need to understand the question. And then he's going to answer it by talking about an olive tree. And he's going to be talking about a natural tree and wild trees. And so there's parts to the story. It's chronological. It goes in order of time. And so this is how I've named those parts. That's just me. So that's how we're going to sort of break up our reading. And in the end, we should be able to answer this question here and understand the purpose of what's going on here. So that's sort of where the next few classes are going to go. Trace, would you mind offering a word of prayer to start our morning?
Father, these you gathered together to study your word, to express our appreciation and worship of you. Lord, we thank you for the beauty of the day, for the color that you have brought us. We thank you for the blessings of being able to worship in a safe place where it is also room. And we thank you, Father, for your word. We ask that as we study this morning, that you would open that to us, that our understanding might be increased, and that you would bless Brian as he leads us, that those things which are edifying for our souls might be brought to us. And we ask these things in the name of your Son, our Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen.
So you may have read this passage or this section many times before. You may have read it once and heard about it, or you may have never heard about this before. Maybe we're in all different parts. Hopefully we're in that one that I've heard it before, it's sort of familiar to me part. But I'm going to read 3 verses from the beginning, what we read last time, just to set the purpose for why we're talking about this. So I'm going to read verse 4 through 7. For this intent have we written these things, that they may know that we hope that we knew of Christ, and we had a hope of his coming, of his glory, many hundred years before his coming. And not only we ourselves had a hope of his glory, but also the holy prophets which were before us. Behold, they believed in Christ and worshipped the Father in his name. And also we worship the Father in his name. And for this intent we keep the law of Moses, it pointing our souls to him. And for this cause it is sanctified unto us for righteousness, even as it was accounted unto Abraham in the wilderness to be obedient unto the commands of God, in offering up his son Isaac, which was a similitude of God in his only begotten Son. Wherefore we search the prophets, and we have many revelations and the spirit of prophecy, and having all these witnesses, we obtain a hope, and our faith becometh unshaken, insomuch that we truly can command in the name of Jesus. So Jacob was sharing these things so that the people that came after him, his children and their children, might have a faith and a hope that's unshaken. And he's laying out things that the prophets have told and sharing that in the form of a parable, so that the people might know that there is a plan and a purpose and an end to God's working with the children of Israel. And not just the children of Israel, but others too. So for us today, I feel like that's also equally as relevant and valid for us today. I believe that it's important for us to have a faith that's unshaken and a hope that's unshaken, so that as we understand what has been written many hundreds and thousands of years ago, we also can see that there's a plan and a purpose and an end for what God has done. We're further along in the story than they were. And we believe we're towards the end of that story, or at the end of that story. But this still describes the end of the story. And so for us to have a faith unshaken, we need to know and realize and understand that the purposes of God, that all of the things that he's been doing, they're still going to be fulfilled. There's still an end. And that end is still right before us. And so just as he wanted his children to have this unshaken faith, we need to explore need to explore the words of the Book of Mormon so that we have an unshaken faith. Okay. So this parable of the olive tree. So I want you to think about, what is the root? What are the branches? What is the fruit? And we're going to watch a quick video. And so this is a guy, I just found it meaningful the way he describes it. He's going to be reading from Romans 11, 16 to 24. So if you have a Bible, you can also read along with what he reads. He's going to read from a different version than what we have. So you'll see that there's going to be different words, but the ideas are the same. I want to talk a little bit about how he interprets what he reads and what he gets right and what he's missing. All right. So this is all, I hope, to help us understand this olive tree and the parable that's going to be shared by Jacob. So hopefully I got the sound right.
Good morning. Paul here in the Riverland, and I'm standing by an olive tree here which has magnificent fruit on it. Great big green olives, be nice and juicy when they ripen. In the background you can see some of the vineyards where they grow their grapes for the wine making. But Paul talks about being grafted into an olive tree, and I'll read a little bit this morning as our meditation from Romans 11, from verse 16 in the Passion Translation. Since Abraham and the patriarchs are consecrated and set apart for God, so also will their descendants be set apart. If the roots of a tree are holy and set apart for God, so too will be the branches. However, some of the branches have been pruned away, and you who were once nothing more than a wild olive branch, God has grafted in, inserting you among the remaining branches as a joint partner to share in the wonderful riches of the cultivated olive stem. So don't be so arrogant as to believe that you are superior to the natural branches. There is no reason to boast, for the new branches don't support the root, but you owe your life to the root that supports you. You might begin to think that some branches were pruned or broken off just to make room for you. Yes, that's true. They were removed because of their unbelief. But remember this, you are only attached by your faith. So don't be presumptuous, but stand in awe and reverence. Since God didn't spare the natural branches that fell into unbelief, perhaps he won't spare you either. So fix your gaze on the simultaneous kindness and strict justice of God. How severely he treated those who fell into unbelief, yet how tender and kind is his relationship with you. So keep on trusting in his kindness, otherwise you also will be cut off. God is more than ready to graft back in the natural branches when they turn from clinging to their unbelief to embracing faith. For if God grafted you in, even though you were taken from what is by nature a wild olive tree, how much more can he reconnect the natural branches by inserting them back into their own cultivated olive tree? So that's amazing, isn't it? You know, we have been grafted in to God's chosen people as the holy people of Israel. The Gentiles, those who were not born of Jewish origin, the Gentiles are grafted in by believing in the Lord Jesus Christ. As simple as that. And, of course, the Jewish people who do not believe in the Messiah will be cut off from the olive tree. So how blessed we are, how beautifully blessed we are to be accepted and grafted into the olive tree that is a holy tree, the family of God.
We're going to stop there. Okay. Lots to talk about there. First, let's talk about olive trees. Okay. We're going to read a lot about this tree. Hopefully we don't get tired of it. So from what you've read before and from what he is reading from Romans, what is the roots in the trunk of the tree? Any thoughts about that?
The roots are the life support
for the tree. That's where you get all of your nutrients and the things that the plant needs to grow. So it's basically the cornerstone or the foundation of what the tree grows and develops from, stands on.
Right. So in this parable, the roots in the trunk are never going to move. Right. The branches get moved around, but the roots in the trunk can't move. They are fixed in the ground. So good. That's where all the nourishment comes from. Any other thoughts there?
Well, it's the strongest part. It's the foundation.
The foundation.
What you were saying, I think it's because it's meant to be the strongest part. So the root's the most important part of the tree, just like the foundation's the most important part of your house. You can't build on sandy land, because if you did, it'd get blown over like today. But it's, I mean, that's the way I look at it as, is that it's the most important part, and it's the foundation, and that's where it all starts and moves up.
Just thinking in general about trees, the trunk has to be, the support has to be strong in its foundation, but it also has to be flexible, so that it doesn't get broken in the wind.
Yep. It's meant to bend.
And it helps deliver all the nutrients to the branches.
This gentleman calls the tree the family of God. That's, I think, a little bit too generic, but it's sort of a good start.
Well, maybe we think of it as the house of Israel.
And so yeah, I mean, we're going to think about, we talked last time about cultivated olive trees and how a tree, to be cultivated, to be olive trees, they grow and are best when they are worked with and cared for and maintained. And so we can think of it as the house of Israel, or we can think about it, I don't have a perfect answer yet, or we can think about it as, this is how I'm going to choose to think about it, God's covenant with his people. In the house, God's covenant comes through the house of Israel. That's who he made his covenants and promises with. But it wasn't to end there, right? It wasn't to stop there. It's not just for them, but he's going to graft people into it, right? Into that covenant. So he didn't make other covenants with other groups of people. He makes one covenant through which the world will be blessed. Just like there's one Savior through whom the world will be blessed. There's not any other saviors. No one else is going to be able to remit our sin, only Jesus Christ. And so Jesus Christ comes through that covenant. It comes through that house. So the root is never going to move. It is the foundation. So I'm thinking about God is committed to his people, and that's never going to move. So what are the branches?
Gentiles is a branch.
Gentiles are a branch?
They would have been grafted, after Israel. So just like we talked about, the word went from Israel to Gentiles. But eventually branches get blown off, branches get broken. But then in this case, the root still stays the same, just like we're talking about. God made a covenant with one people, not others, just one.
So I think it's fair to say, that the branches are groups of people. Or I don't think we're talking about individuals necessarily, but groups of people. And groups of people are brought into that covenant. And so when this is talking about wild olive trees, we're thinking that is commonly interpreted as the Gentiles or other groups of people that were not originally part of that covenant, but are brought into it because of the love of God for them and his desire for good fruit. Okay. We'll talk about why branches are important here in a minute, but branches have a purpose because without branches, we can't have any fruit. I mean, branches bring forth, or branches are a part of the function of the tree, right? For it to have life, there needs to be branches. What's the fruit? This is the part I'm really still praying about. But any thoughts about this at this point? He talks about this tree that he's in front of, and it has really good fruit.
Is it the fruits of the Spirit?
So what's the fruits of the Spirit? We don't need to name them necessarily, but what are they? Kindness and gentleness and things.
Blessings.
Keep going.
Gifts to us from God.
Gifts from God. Uh-huh.
They're useful, they're tangible.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of the overflow of what the branch is. It's like a result of the nutrients. and
Uh-huh.
That which has been transported to the branches and given to the branches nutritionally and healthy, and then the branch bursts forth with fruit.
Right. And it's the whole point of the tree, right? I mean, the tree does a lot of things, but we're going to hear in this parable, Jacob is talking about that the master of the vineyard is ultimately, he's concerned about the fruit. And if the tree doesn't bear fruit, then he has no harvest at the end. And so I watched another video where they were talking about, reminding us, oh no, it's the one I posted to Facebook today. Yeah, with the guy talking to the kids. It's really interesting. You may want to watch that. Olive oil is used for cooking, but it was also used for light and heat that was burned. And so, we're not just popping olives into our mouth. Like the olive was a pretty important thing, and it's useful. And the fruit is a blessing to us. And because of the action of the roots and the tree and the trunk and the branches, blessings come. Because of the covenant coming to us and us accepting the covenant and committing to it, the Spirit comes into us, right? And then the outpouring of the Spirit in our lives is our blessings. They're the fruit. They're the things that we're able to do and be for others because of the outpouring of the Spirit within our lives. I guess it could I also wondered is the fruit, like our beautiful souls that the Lord is able to harvest and bring unto Him. And He wants us to be, He wants our souls to be clean and pure and useful. So there's probably a couple ways to look at fruit. But we want to talk about these more as we end our discussion too, because we're just getting started. But if we're going to read this and we're talking about all these symbols, we really need a little bit of grounding here. So in Jacob 3:26-31, Jacob is going to ask a question, and we'll just go ahead and start with those 6 verses and talk a little bit about what he's trying to introduce. Oh, no. Sorry, I missed something. Okay. Our friend, the Australian guy who's reading from Romans chapter 11, he talks a lot about Gentiles, right? So we're like, so the tree is the house of Israel, and we're grafted into the house of Israel. And that's like really where his story stops. Is here's the house of Israel. If they don't believe, they're going to be cut off. And then the Gentiles will be grafted in. And he's reading it's a lot about Gentiles. Okay? In the Book of Mormon, right, the story is about Gentiles, but it's about the house of Israel also. So he skips 2 verses. He stops a little early, in my opinion, And he doesn't read these verses. Brethren, I would not, brethren, that you should be ignorant of this mystery, lest you should be wise in your own conceits, that blindness in part is happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles be come in. And then all Israel shall be saved. As it is written, there shall come out of Zion the deliverer, and shall turn away the ungodliness from Jacob. For this is my covenant unto them, when I shall take away all their sins. And so a lot of times I feel like Christianity, it's all about, we focus on us as the Gentiles, and we're going to read about what that means here in this parable. We're going to get to a place where we see that. We need to remember that God's covenant to the house of Israel never stopped. And they're part of the whole story. So we're going to see that there's more to that than just we're going to graft wild branches in, and that's the Gentiles, and we're all good now. It's not the end of that story. Ken and then Charles.
I don't know if you're going to talk about the actual grafting process, but when I listened to that little clip earlier, yesterday or whenever you sent it out, the thing that stuck out to me is he kept saying, all you need to do is to believe, and you're grafted. But there's more to it than just a belief. There's an actual, he's kind of, to me, he left out the covenant part. And that actual grafting in is, when you graft a plant, and I don't want to, if you're going to talk about this later, I can wait, but when you graft something in, if you've ever seen it done, I know that second video that you showed, they actually showed how it's kind of done, but, there's a cutting that takes place from the branch, or a little twig or whatever you're going to graft in, and you actually cut the tree or the branch itself, and you place it within, and then there's a binding that takes place that binds that grafted in part to the tree or the trunk or whatever you're grafting it into to seal it in there, to get it to seal and to grow. And so it's not just a word. Belief is important, of course it is, but there is an actual action that seals that, and that is sealed together through the covenant that we make. Just like a legal document, I can have an agreement with Rex, but if we don't have it legalized and sealed, then that agreement is just a word thing, which is of no value. And so you have to have that sealing through the covenant. And so when I listened to that video, that's just stuck out to me large. It's like, well, yeah, there's a belief, but there's a whole lot more to it than just this belief that's going to, the Gentiles have to have this covenant relationship to be truly grafted in.
That's a great point. It's a really powerful point, and then I think that's part of what our church has to offer the world is the reminder that there's more to following Christ than just saying I believe in Christ, and it's not so much about following a set of laws as it is a covenanting with Him and seeking to become like Him and having a change of heart. And so if we're cut off from here and we're put over here, that's a pretty big change, right? We're not part of that old tree anymore. We're cut off, we're moved over here, we're grafted in, we're bound into that new tree. And we did watch a video of that last week, 2 weeks ago. I don't know if you remember that. And we're now bound into a new tree. And we need to, and those two branches have to be lined up just right so that the nutrients flow and we become part of that new covenant. So there's a process there.
Well, how many people have profited just off of the fact of believing? All of your TV worshipers or preachers or whatever, they make millions of dollars a year off of that one thing. Oh, if you go and you believe, you'll be saved. So it doesn't matter what you do, as long as you say, I believe in God, you're fine. But when people actually study and they know and they realize all the work that goes into this wonderful God we have, I really don't want to do that. Just like, all the steps that go into grafting, you have to be precise. And if you mess up, you got to do it again. Well, once we mess up a couple of times, I'm done with this. I'm not good at this. So it's kind of the same thing. We catch so many people where we basically say, hey, believe. Oh, hey, give to my church. Believe. And there's so much more to it, but so many times people just don't want to put the work into it. They want to, be holiday Christians or Sunday Christians where they go to church on Sunday, but then everything else is nothing. No, you live it your whole life. You're an example.
Chuck?
Just to support what you were saying before this last topic came up, was that all throughout the Old Testament, the Lord to his prophets never discards the house of Israel. He always calls them back to him. And it doesn't change in the New Testament. He's still calling to the house of Israel as well as to the Gentiles.
Mm-hmm. It's an everlasting covenant. It is the covenant. That's why it's so important that he said to Abraham, right, through your seed will the children of the earth be blessed. That was the covenant through which everyone in the world is going to enter into to find salvation. There isn't any other covenant.
Nephites were the same way. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but Nephites were the same way. Until they were finally killed off, God kept calling them back, And it wasn't until they were killed that obviously that ended.
And then it says, boast not against the branches, for thou bearest not the root. And we're told not to boast about that.
Mm-hmm.
We can be cut off. We can fall away, and we all know people that have, and maybe we ourselves, but we can always be grafted back in. He allows that, but we're not supposed to boast, and that's pretty plain here in Romans.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to be careful of that.
Yeah, we're just the branches. We're not the source. We didn't make ourselves. We didn't come out of the ground by ourselves. We're the branches. We're the vine. He's the vine, we're the branches. It's all good. So there's a lot there. We're going to read in here. We're going to find that, this talk about bad fruit when we get to that part, right? There's this comment that branches become haughty. So there's a pretty good discussion that we'll have about when we get that. So yeah, there's lots of good things here, and again, this comes out of the Book of Mormon, written by a teenager in New York, and so there's some deep thoughts here about olive trees. Pretty sure that Joseph Smith didn't have olive trees in his experience and his background to discuss. All right, so every time you stop us is good, because there's a lot of ideas here, and it's easy to miss good thoughts. So if we have thoughts, we should stop. We're going to read Jacob 3:26-31. Who's got a mic close that can read that for me?
I can read it.
Okay, awesome.
3:26. And now I, Jacob, am led on by the Spirit unto prophesying, for I believe by the workings of the Spirit which is in me, that by the stumbling of the Jews they will reject the stone upon which they might build, and have safe foundation. But behold, according to the Scriptures, this stone shall become the great and last, and the only sure foundation upon which the Jews can build. And now, my beloved, how is it possible that these, after having rejected the sure foundation, can ever build upon it, that it may become the head of their corner? Behold, my beloved brethren, I will unfold this mystery unto you, If I do not by any means get shaken from my firmness in the Spirit and stumble because of my over-anxiety for you. Behold, my brethren, do ye not remember to have read the words of the prophet Zenos, which spake unto the house of Israel, saying, Hearken, O ye house of Israel, and hear the words of me, a prophet of the Lord. For behold, thus saith the Lord, I will liken thee, O house of Israel, like unto a tame olive tree, which a man took and nourished in his vineyard, and it grew and waxed old and began to decay.
Perfect. Oh, he's good. I'm not sure why it wants to autoplay here. Keep going. All right. So thoughts about that section there? Because that's our question. We sort of introduced that at the beginning. So I'll start, and then we can keep going, because this is pretty important. The question's important. When Jacob asked the question, he doesn't say, is it going to be possible? Can the house of Israel ever come back? He didn't ever ask, is the house of Israel doomed? Right? That's not the point of this question. The question is, I understand by prophecy that the house of Israel will come in back to this Jesus Christ. After having rejected him, they will accept him. So the question is, how can that happen? That seems impossible, but I believe that. How can that happen? So the end isn't in doubt. What he's asking about is how? What's that process like? Right? So I think that's important, is we're not doubting the end. We're just like, man, God, can you explain to me your workings, your majesty? Because it seems impossible to me. Yes?
Well, in the very next verse, he says, if I don't get shaken from my intent, I will show you how it's done.
Mm-hmm. So I want to reveal to you through the Spirit. This isn't Jacob's knowledge. This is what the Spirit has revealed to him about this prophecy, this parable.
You have to have a change of heart.
They have to have a change of heart.
No, I meant, how can it be done?
Oh.
A person would have to have a change.
Yes, a person and a whole people. A whole group of people have to have a change of heart.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
You keep your eye on the one who's going to actually do the work. One of my favorite scriptures is, I think it's 1 Nephi 165. With men, this is impossible, but with God, whatever so things I speak are possible.
Mm-hmm.
I'm butchering that, but I'm close. We can't do that. The olive branch can't jump up on the tree.
Nope.
The one who is the master of the grove is going to graft the branch in by his hand.
I think we get caught up in trying to answer that question ourselves. I mean, we have the answer, we know what's gonna happen, but I think we get caught up in trying to answer that and search for it and come up with our own ideas on how that is exactly gonna happen. And there's only one master. I mean, Jesus Christ.
Mhm.
He's gonna be the one. When you talk about, change of heart, it's gonna be through him to those people. I think, but like I said, I think so many times, we try to predict, well, this was gonna happen, or that's gonna happen, Y2K was gonna end the world, I still woke up the next day. So, I think that's sometimes, as a people, we get caught up in, and we have to go back and remember, just as it stated, it states in 32, that it's the master of the vineyard. They're the ones that are grafted. That's who we call upon.
The stories that are in the scriptures are great because it wasn't because man did all these things, but people were placed in circumstances where it looked like there was no way to accomplish things. I'm thrown into a fiery furnace, right? There's only one person that could take care of that. Sort of like here, there's only one master of the vineyard, and there's only one person that can fix this tree. So he's the only one that can do it. And we have our part. He calls us to action, but we're the branches. Okay, so we have our part, we do our part. But he's ordering things. So we might ask the same question as like, how can Zion come forth? Right? The question isn't going to be, is Zion going to come forth? That isn't the question, right? How is your kingdom going to come? How is that going to work? That's the question. Would love to know. So the center of the story is around an olive tree. It's old and has begun to decay. So that's the house of Israel. It's old and has begun to decay. It's been worked on and worked on and worked on. It's been pruned and digged and dunged, and it's not doing very well. And we're going to do the pruning and the digging and the dunging, but that's not going to fix it, right? So something else has to be done to fix this tree. And I did find out, I was just doing a lot of searching here. This is a website here, 13 great solutions on how to revive an olive tree. It's just some website, somebody, everybody's an expert about things. There's no talk about grafting here, but there are some interesting ideas. Is the olive tree actually dead? Well, that's not the case now. But the olive trees are prone to disease and things, and so they've got to be taken care of. So if the root and the trunks are bad, then there's nothing you can do about it. Well, that's not the case here, but if you don't fix it, that's what could happen. God's not going to let his covenant die. And so if we have an old tree that's beginning to decay, he's not going to let that happen. We can trim back parts of the tree that are not working very well, right? That are diseased. We can get rid of suckers, right? All of the things that come off the trunk but are never going to do anything. Yeah. Let's see here. We can check our soil. We got to be in well-draining soil. We got to be in the right spot. Can't overwater it and underwater it. We'll see that in the parable. We can amend the soil. We can add things to it to make it better. And so that's why we dig around the tree and add things to it. We can fertilize the tree. That fertilizing is going to come from dunging the tree. We can make sure it's in a sunny location. It's in the vineyard. We can't do much about that. Diseases. So all of those things are mentioned here in this parable. That's coming out of here. But those things aren't enough to fix this tree. And so we're going to get to grafting. So I just wanted to throw out one other thing about trees here. We'll watch the pruning one later. Oh, keep going. Hopefully this isn't too much about trees. Okay, this is how trees work, right? The roots in the ground, and they absorb water. The way that water moves up the trunk is through a process called transpiration. Okay, that means that there's got to be a suction that takes place, right? The water's down here and it's got to go up. Well, how is it going to go up? We got to get a vacuum started. Okay, so the water's got to go out somewhere. So where do the waters go out? Through the leaf, right? The leaf is gonna leak water, right? It's got pores in it, and water, vapor, moisture is going to come out of the leaf, right? And so as water is pulled out of the leaves get dry, and that sucks water up through the tree, okay? And if the tree is undamaged, it's going to make its way up through all of the cells of the tree, all the way up to the leaves and the branches. So if we don't have branches that are vital, that have energy and are strong, then the water is just going to sort of stay where it is, and then it's going to start to rot the trunk. And so the water's not moving anywhere. And so strong branches on the tree are vital. If we have a bunch of dead branches with not very many leaves on it, then the tree is going to die because it doesn't get energy, but it also can't get rid of moisture, can't move moisture. So it's all part of the story. So why are we going to graft new branches in? Because if there are a bunch of dead branches, we got to have branches to pull that water up to keep the tree alive. Okay, so I hope that helps just a little bit as we move on. Okay, so we're going to read a sort of a longish section, and that's probably the farthest we'll get today. We're going to read 32 to 48, and we're going to read a little bit about how the master decides to sort of save this tree that is getting old and starting to decay. So someone with a microphone, anybody volunteer to read 32 to 48? Okay. Is that one on? I don't know.
You hear anything?
Didn't know if it was capturing you or not.
We're the tech guy.
Okay. I just want to make sure you're missing this for people at home.
Starting in verse 32.
Yeah.
And it came to pass that the master of the vineyard went forth, and he saw that his olive tree began to decay. And he said, I will prune it, and dig about it, and nourish it, and perhaps it may shoot forth young and tender branches, and it perish not. And it came to pass that he pruned it, and digged about it, and nourished it according to his word. And it came to pass that after many days he began to put forth somewhat a little, young and tender branches, but behold, the main top thereof began to perish. And it came to pass that the master of the vineyard saw it, and he said unto his servant, It grieveth me that I should lose this tree. Wherefore go and pluck the branches from a wild olive tree, and bring them hither unto me, and we will pluck off those main branches which are beginning to wither away, and we will cast them into the fire, that they may be burned. And behold, saith the Lord of the vineyard, I will take away many of these young and tender branches, and I will graft them whithersoever I will. And it mattereth not that if it so be that the root of this tree will perish, I may preserve the fruit thereof unto myself. Wherefore I will take these young and tender branches, and I will graft them whithersoever I will. Take thou the branches of the wild olive tree, and graft them in the stead thereof. And these which I have plucked off I will cast into the fire, and burn them, that they may not cumber the ground of my vineyard. And it came to pass that the servant of the Lord of the vineyard did according to the word of the Lord of the vineyard, and grafted in the branches of the wild olive tree. And the Lord of the vineyard caused that it should be digged about, and pruned, and nourished, saying unto his servant, It grieveth me that I should lose this tree. Wherefore, that perhaps I might preserve the roots thereof, that they perish not, that I might preserve them unto myself, I have done this thing. Wherefore go thy way, watch the tree, and nourish it, according to my words. And these will I place in the nethermost part of my vineyard, whithersoever I will, it mattereth not unto thee. And I do it that I may preserve unto myself the natural branches of the tree, and also that I may lay up fruit thereof against the season unto myself, for it grieveth me that I should lose this tree and the fruit thereof. And it came to pass that the Lord of the vineyard went his way and hid the natural branches of the tame olive tree in the nethermost parts of the vineyard, some in one and some in another, according to his will and pleasure.
There are some natural breaking points in here, so we just have to take advantage of those. So we have the first action to save this tree, which is we're going to cut off natural branches. It says that they're sort of little, and we're going to put them in other parts of the vineyard because we want to save them. And I'll talk about that a little bit. There's some detail there that's interesting. But we're going to bring in wild branches and put them into the natural tree. So we already sort of know what that means, right? We're talking about a scattering of the house of Israel, that parts of the house of Israel will be taken and placed different places so that they might remain and bring forth fruit in different places. And we're talking about bringing in people into the covenant. In this case, probably the Gentiles is the best explanation, that would come into the covenant. So that's sort of like the essential act here. So let's talk about words or details in that section that we think are important.
Well, if you don't take hold, it doesn't sound very good for you. You're going to be burned. I mean, that's kind of what, he said that three times, I think, in there already.
So you don't pollute the ground.
Yeah, if you don't take hold, I mean, the outcome's not good.
Yeah, so we gotta connect to the covenant for it to work. We'll watch a little video about pruning if we have time today, because it's really interesting. What's the purpose of pruning?
To get rid of diseased branches or branches that aren't fruitful.
Right. Because what's the goal? Fruit, right? So if something is contrary to the goal, it needs to come off, right? And so it'll be taken off. That feels harsh, and I don't have a perfect understanding of what it means to be pulled off and burned, but we know that there are those that will leave this world that don't know about God yet, right? We know that there's a plan for that, but we know that's true. If we don't know him, we choose not him. If we don't choose him, we won't know him. We won't be a part of his covenant. What else? What else stands out to you from that?
Sounds like you took a lot of young tender branches and placed them in
There's a lot.
other
They'll talk about 3 later, 3 places, but there's a lot. Yeah.
The Lord of the vineyard left someone to watch over the grafting as it's taking place. So we're not left alone. There is someone watching.
There's always the mention of the servant or the servants in this parable that are doing his work.
I thought it was interesting that he talks about, let's see, he says something about, I just had it a minute ago. He's talking about taking the young branches and putting them in other trees, so that even if the roots of this main tree die, he can still get the fruit, from these other places. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
There's 2 places where it talks about the roots, and and there's a lot of double negatives there. So the first one's confusing to me. 38 says, "It mattereth not that if it be so that the root of this tree will perish." But then in 44 he said, "Perhaps I might preserve the roots thereof, that they perish not." So I think that the master is committed to keeping the roots alive, right? But certainly, yes, that those things are going to go and bear fruit in other places. The word that stands out to me in this is grieveth. So I think that this is speaking to the heart of God and this whole story. The Lord grieves that anyone would not be successful. He grieves for his people. And because he grieves for his people, he does all of these things. And it's all for their benefit. So I think that it's important to recognize that this is all out of love that he does this work. It's all out of his care and concern that we be successful, that he does all of this work. And so there's just a concern and a care of this master. It's not that he just wants to make a lot of money, right? He truly is concerned about the life of the tree and the parts of the tree. So that's what stands out to me.
You said you were confused about 38. It says that he mattered not if the roots of that tree perish, but he still wants to nourish and save the roots.
Uh-huh.
So to me, that means like the roots are like the covenant, the gospel, His word to us.
Mm-hmm.
And different trees, there's not just one tree.
Mm-hmm.
So that could be like a group of people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you can't stop his work from going forward.
Right. So
Right.
that's how I interpret it, that he's just saying it matters not if the roots of this tree perish. I'm still going to save their spirits, because I believe that the fruits are the spirits, our actions, us as humans,
Mm-hmm.
our blessings,
Mhm.
all of that combined.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And there's lots of trees here,
He's not
right,
gonna
yeah.
He's not going to let all the roots die.
Right.
It's not the only tree in the world.
Any other thoughts there?
I guess as a plant person, you put a lot of time and energy and care into, your trees or my house plants, but, it's like, some trees and plants are very expensive, so like you not only are out like financially, but then you're caring for it, and it's like, oh my gosh, did I water it too much? Did I not water it enough? Like, why is it dying? And like, it's like, you're trying, but it's, you love them, and it's, I love this parable because, like, I can see how he would feel that way about us, because when you do flourish, or, when you see the plants flourish or the tree flourish, it's like you get, I don't know, I get super excited when I see new leaves on my plants, but like, it's like, oh my gosh, and, so I can imagine him, being excited when we flourish, and when we're producing good fruit, and, we're sharing the gospel with others, or, we're, and causing like a multiplication of, fruit, or, just new branches, it's like, I just can't help but think that makes him excited too, like it's, it's like, oh, my work's paying off, I don't know if God thinks that way, but, it's like, it's gotta be gratifying for God in some ways to like see us being fruitful.
Well, you gotta think he rejoices every time he sees somebody
Yeah.
accept the gospel and make a covenant
Yeah,
with him. So.
exactly. I don't know. That's just from a plant person perspective.
Yeah,
I'm
Mike.
not sure Brian is thrilled with our comments.
No, Mike Ferris texted me yesterday because I think he's speaking in next week. Is that right? For Thanksgiving, and he asked me, "Do you think God is thankful?" He may have texted some. Okay, and so that was my answer. Really, is that God loves us so much, and He works with us so much, and when he sees us recognize that love and we seek it and we bear fruit because of it, that makes him thankful. He's not thankful because he needs a house and he got a house, right? God is thankful because his work and his glory is people. And when he sees that, when people respond to his work, it brings joy to him. That's his majesty. It's sort of like a parent when we see our children successful. It brings joy to us. We have a lemon tree in our house, and we've been working on this lemon tree for years.
Yeah.
And it's about this big in a pot, and Jenny has worked to like pollinate the little flowers by like putting the pollen, like with Q-tips and things, and we have 2 lemons on that tree. And they're just now turning yellow. We have never, ever, ever gotten lemons from that tree.
No, we did, but they were little tiny.
It was a
ones.
little
The
tiny
squirrels
one,
got
and the
them.
squirrel got it.
Hate those
But we have never actually gotten fruit or harvested fruit from that tree. But by golly, we bring it in every winter. We water it. We fertilize it. We try to pollinate it, and we got lemons off of it. And now the tree brings us joy. With that, because all along there was the promise of fruit and the hope of fruit, and we never gave up on it. And now we have 2 lemons.
Ask Rex about his lemon.
What about Lex's lemon tree?
A good one.
Do you?
Yeah. They do the same thing. They wipe each leaf down. Get what you do to just to produce this fruit. All they go through to do it, it's amazing.
He doesn't want
He doesn't want to know he's got a lemon tree, he's going to come get his lemons. That's what we're doing.
So the Lord wants the roots to survive, and he wants fruit, right? That's his goal, is that the tree would bring forth fruit. And when a person of the vineyard and is working with that tree, that's the whole point, is to keep the tree successful so that it can bear fruit, so that it can be good. So here's a quick video. We watched this How to Graft an Olive Tree last time. I can't tell if that's the same guy without a beard or not, but he's going to show us how to prune an olive tree and what he's he's thinking about what he's thinking about as he prunes this tree.
How are we going, everybody? Now, we did a segment the other day on picking the olives, and I spoke a little bit about pruning your olive trees. Well, after you've harvested your olives, you can prune them, and you've got the whole of winter to do that, preferably by the end of July, no later than that, because it'll start to warm up, and sometimes your olive trees will actually start to bloom before then. All this upright growth here tends to not produce any fruit. You want to be able to create an open vase shape. Ideally, with an olive tree, it needs to open up really wide. So in this case here, as you can see, all this upright growth has to come off. It's no good because it's going to do absolutely nothing for me besides reach up to the sky. Yes, you will get some fruit, but nowhere near as much as you would if you had it opened out. So all I'm going to do is take away all this inner part, especially the middle part, to open up the vase, just like this. And the stuff that's growing inwards especially. And see all this height up here? That's useless. I don't need all this. I need to get all this down, bring it right down, and thin it out at the same time. Look at that. You've got a branch growing inside upon the other one, on top of the other one. It's similar to your fruit trees, folks. Don't mind the high wind. You get a lot of crossing of branches. It's high prone to getting disease and damaged wood on it. What I'm doing is thinning it out. There's a lot of internal growth that doesn't need to be there, and it's only going to cause more problems. Less sunlight, the lack of sunlight, the higher chance of no flowers really, or very little production. So take the length out of it, thin out every second branch, because you don't need a million branches. See that? Look at that now. All this here, all that's growing inside there. Look at it there. Useless. No good, so we basically take it off there, clean it up like that. And you do the same thing all the way around the tree. Go around and thin out the weaker branches, the ones that are crossing over, and any suckers from the base as well. These are useless. Unless you want to grow your tree off the ground, like a little shrub, take them off completely.
cut back all the other outer branches and thin out every middle one. You don't need a million branches on top of each other. Like that, there. And once you finish pruning your tree, folks, prepare yourself for June, July. I know it's a little bit early now, but prepare yourself to feed your trees with a bit of compost manure and, more importantly, the black grit for the calcium, because that's what...
He's got to dung his tree so that it has fertilizer. So we're pruning that tree for the purpose of getting fruit, so that the tree is in a condition to produce fruit. Any other actions he took that sort of stood out to you?
He probably took half the tree off.
Aggressive,
Yeah.
at least.
I mean, me not being a plant person would fully not understand that. Like, what's the purpose of taking off half the plant, you know, after it's already grown? I mean, I've learned a little when coming to grass, because I try to make my grass look good, so I mean, I'm not very good at that either.
He's a tree
so,
person, yeah.
I mean, I don't, I mean, he explained it, but I'm still like, that makes sense to me, but.
Well, he knows what's going to help the tree bear fruit and what's not, because of
More is not
experience.
always better.
More is not always better.
Well, and then by taking off the excess, that allows more light to penetrate the leaves, which is gonna help bear better fruit.
Yeah, I like that phrase, when he said the sunlight, of course, I'm thinking of the sunlight.
Mhm.
You know.
Mhm.
And he said, so he cut off those that were growing inward.
Mhm.
Just kind of phrase he used. So,
There's probably layers there too, but you know, there's also this thing about like the gospel is pure and simple, and plain and precious. That's how he presented it to us. That's how Jesus communicated it. And you know, we can get our thinking and our teaching and our belief full of all kinds of other things too. And he works within us to help sort of prune out. It's important to prune out the things that, you know, we start to sort of bring back in or enter into belief that, you know, don't do good for us and are just extra. Keep it simple. This tree is going to blow over, is going to have problems if it's just this big, massful tree.
Yes. Keep it simple, Steve.
Keep it simple. Remember what he said about later on when he talks about the height of the tree? If a tree just keeps growing up and up and up and up, it's doing that for sunlight, and that's good to some extent, right? But he said branches that just keep growing up, straight up, are not the branches that are going to bear fruit. And so he removed them. And when we get to this place again where he's talking about the branches becoming haughty, right? We're going to see, right, that we're going to see some comments about those branches that are concerning for the health of the tree. And knowing how this tree is pruned helps us understand a little bit about what that is going to mean a little bit later. So just getting a little bit of basics about how someone today in a real world would take care of their olive tree, I think helps us understand the truth of what's being shared here in the parable. So we have one step in this process, is that to save a tree, the Lord is going to graft the natural branches out and scatter them. And who are we talking about? Who do we know that's scattered? Well, the Jews are scattered everywhere, but what's one group of Jews that are scattered that we know about?
Well, Lehi.
Lehi, right? So that's really important for later on. And other groups are scattered out also, okay? Gentiles are grafted into the covenant. That's you and me and anyone else that's been grafted into this covenant because we've learned about Jesus Christ and accepted what God has tried to communicate all along, is that he wants a people that will love him as he loved them, as expressed through his son. And so we have that has happened. That if this is chronological, that's already happened in the world today. And we're going to see then, as that has progressed over time, what has become of that. So we're going to read next about these wild trees and the branches and what kind of fruit comes off it originally. And then over time, what happens to this fruit. So that's where we'll go next. Because of time, we'll get stop. Tried to break it up a little bit.